Okay, so today let's talk about one of the reasons why the sacred process of a normal physiological birth is being sabotaged in the current Western model of labor and birth. And that boils down to the Friedman and Zhang curve. And so if you want to learn more about these curves and how they've dictated the way medical professionals should approach labor and birth, stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Hersacredcradle. My name is Renata De Castro. I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, birth and postpartum doula, helping women to holistically prepare for the big day to meet their baby. And so my practice is focused on strengthening the mind-body connection, empowering women to advocate for themselves, and to learn all of their birth options that are available to them. Okay, so today let's dive into one of the reasons why the sacred process of a normal physiological birth is being sabotaged in the current medicalized model of birth. And for those of you who are not too sure what a normal physiological birth process is, it's basically allowing your body to do what it needs to do in order to give birth without any medical intervention. So a woman is closely in tune with what her body is doing and what her body needs, and she is able to give birth to her baby without interventions. Let's get back to these lovely curves. So the Friedman curve was created in 1950, and in 2010, the Zhang curve was a refined version of the 1950s curve. And basically, both of these curves, the Friedman curve in the 1950s and the Zhang curve, which was established in 2010, are basically markers of how far a woman's cervix should be dilated by X amount of hours. So this is what your OB is going along with in terms of their approach to labor and birth. They are taking a look at these graphs. If your cervix is not dilated by a certain time as dictated by these curves, then it warrants medical intervention. Now, there's a huge problem with that because medical interventions are being introduced way too soon and just way too much. Another reason why this is not a great approach is that cervical checks can be very uncomfortable. It can be triggering for women. It could bring up past traumas, especially if they have been victims of sexual abuse. It creates a sense of fear, embarrassment, hostility in her body when her body is constantly being invaded by a doctor who's trying to check her cervix. Another shortcoming of this practice is that cervical checks are inaccurate. How are they even measuring the cervix? Every care provider has different sized fingers, so therefore the measurements are so ambiguous. What is the point? What do these numbers actually tell us? And especially when they're imprecise. Another reason why this practice should just not be happening is that constant checking of the cervix can increase a woman's chances of contracting an infection. So if doctors are always placing their fingers in the cervix or tools in the cervix, this is increasing a woman's chance of infection. And lastly, because this is just so number related, we're obsessed with numbers at this point. When we're checking how far a woman has dilated, it keeps her in her prefrontal cortex of her brain, the thinking part of her brain, when birth actually asks us to surrender to the innate knowing part of our brain, the primal part of our brain. And so when you keep a woman in her prefrontal cortex, you are feeding her fear, stress. She's overthinking. Her body is going to tense up now because she's just so obsessed with these numbers, which actually add no value to her birth experience. I've had a client who was dilated at 4 centimeters, After many hours at the hospital, when she requested to get into the birthing tub, within an hour she was dilated to 9 centimeters. And the midwives were actually shocked. They're like, there's no way that you would feel the need to push, when she expressed that she felt the need to push. And that is just the power of a woman listening to her body, knowing exactly what she needed. She needed the comfort of the water, which is nature's epidural. And plus it just really, it's just, which helps oxytocin to flow. Her body felt safe enough to release. And so that is why she was able to dilate exponentially. And so unfortunately, in the OB's practice, they don't know what a normal physiological birth looks like. They don't know how to support it. They can only view birth through a fear-based lens. And so they're looking for things to go wrong. They're trained to address complications. And I'm not saying that OBs are not needed. They're absolutely needed. Their services are needed, but it should not be the norm. There are instances where, yes, a woman may need medical intervention, but it is a very, very, very rare thing. The reason why births are so heavily medicalized in the system is because women are accepting these interventions early on in their labor and birth experience. And it's those interventions that cause a cascade of other interventions that ultimately lead into a C-section. You see, once you can avoid going for the induction or going for that epidural at the very beginning, then you could save your entire birth experience and really embrace the sacredness of that normal physiological birth process. Going back to the Friedman and Zhang curve, when labor and birth veers off course from these curves, medical care providers need to act fast because they don't want to be slapped with a malpractice lawsuit. They need to show that they were proactive and they're trying to do everything in their control to control the labor and birth process so that it doesn't lead to any complications and that it ends in a live mother and baby. And that is just their end goal. It's not about the mother's emotional and spiritual well-being. It's not about how a baby is welcomed into this world with gentleness and tenderness. It is about, okay, do we have a live baby? Do we have a live mother? And yes, that matters. But what's happening is that we're pumping out a lot of traumatized mothers in society from these birth experiences and are not able to step into motherhood feeling empowered, which their babies very much deserve. They deserve a mother who feels empowered. They deserve a mother who has felt that they gave birth to them in dignity. And so this is where the system is failing a lot of women. And so by following these very rigid curves and introducing medical interventions way too much and way too soon is sabotaging the birth experiences of many women. OBs don't understand that the environment plays an important role for a mother to give birth, for her body to do what it needs to do to give birth. Because usually in hospital settings, it's a very overstimulating environment. Bright lights, lots of beeping sounds, patients, lots of people walking around. There's a lot of chatter if there's a large birth team. Cervical checks are always disrupting the process of the natural process of a normal physiological birth. Maybe a woman is hooked up to many monitors at this point as well. There are a lot of things that are part of the standard care in a hospital that disrupts the normal physiological birth process. And really what a woman needs is a dim room. She needs privacy. She needs quiet. She does not need overstimulation. She needs calm in her environment. It's very, very simple. She needs hydration. She needs fuel from food. She needs a soothing, warm bathtub. And she does not need to be placed on a timer because a normal physiological birth does not follow a rigid timeline. The woman ultimately needs to feel safe emotionally, physically, and spiritually. This is something an OB or a hospital can never really provide a woman 100%. And this is why I'm a huge advocate for home births. It offers that sense of safety. You have control of who is in your home that is aligned with your birth values, who can support you in this beautiful unfolding of life. And you don't have to follow a rigid timeline when you are at home. So for all the mamas who are pregnant, preparing for labor and birth, I want you to remember choosing your care provider is so important. Understanding their philosophy is crucial, and understanding how they approach labor and birth will make a huge difference in the way that you experience labor and birth. And so if you're giving birth in the system, this is just a heads up that the system approaches birth from a very fear-based lens. It is not supportive of the whole woman, and things will be treated in isolation. You will be subjected to certain timelines and will be offered interventions over and over and over again. And so just being mindful of the choice that you make and navigating it as such. Understanding where your care provider is coming from, if they're following these lovely curves, you need to understand this is just giving you an idea of how they will approach labor and birth. And I want you to know that a normal physiological birth process does not follow a rigid timeline.